Joseph Goebbels was Hitler's most loyal propagandist, brilliant, ruthless, and utterly devoted to the Nazi cause. But as the Third Reich collapsed, his loyalty turned monstrous. What he did in those final hours remains one of history's darkest acts, and the secret behind it is unbelievable. The master of manipulation, perfecting the art of the lie. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, Joseph Goebbels was appointed Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, a newly created position that gave him unprecedented control over German culture, media, and information. Goebbels' first major institutional creation was the Reich Chamber of Culture, an organization designed to purge what the Nazis called degenerate influences from German cultural life. And when they said degenerate, they primarily meant Jewish. Artists, writers, musicians, filmmakers, journalists. If you were Jewish or if your work didn't align with Nazi ideology, you were out. Your career was over. Your voice was silenced. And if you were lucky, that's all that happened to you. One of Goebbels' first major public spectacles came in May 1933, just months after the Nazis took power. He orchestrated the infamous book burnings, where thousands of books written by Jewish authors, leftist thinkers, and other undesirable writers were thrown into bonfires across Germany. Students, professors, and Nazi party members gathered to watch as the works of Einstein, Freud, Marx, and countless others went up in flames. This wasn't just censorship. This was a public ritual, a symbolic act of cultural cleansing that declared war on ideas themselves. But Goebbels understood something that many propagandists before and since have missed. And this is that propaganda isn't just about controlling what people know. It's about controlling how they feel. He developed and refined techniques that included the big lie, the idea that if you tell a lie big enough and repeat it often enough, people will eventually believe it. He understood the power of emotional appeals over rational argument. He knew that catchy slogans and simple messages were more effective than complex explanations. One of his most successful innovations was the mass distribution of affordable radios, called People's Receivers, Volksempfänger. Think about the genius of this strategy. By making radios cheap and widely available, Goebbels ensured that Hitler's speeches could be broadcast directly into German homes, factories, and public spaces. The Führer's voice became inescapable, omnipresent. You couldn't avoid it even if you wanted to, and those speeches were carefully orchestrated events. Goebbels turned them into theatrical productions, complete with dramatic lighting, massed crowds, and perfectly timed pauses. He understood that people aren't just convinced by words, they're swept up by atmosphere, by the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves, by the collective energy of a crowd responding in unison. Film was another powerful tool in Goebbels' arsenal. He backed the production of explicitly anti-Semitic propaganda films like The Eternal Jew in 1940, a vicious piece of propaganda that portrayed Jewish people as subhuman parasites. He also supported Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will in 1935, which documented the 1934 Nuremberg Rally and transformed a political event into a piece of cinematic art that glorified Nazi power and Hitler's cult of personality. But here's something crucial to understand. Not all Nazi propaganda was as obvious as The Eternal Jew. Goebbels promoted entertainment films, lighter fare that seemed apolitical on the surface. Why? Because he understood that if every single piece of media was overtly propagandistic, people would tune out. They'd recognize it as propaganda and resist it. So instead, he created an ecosystem where some content was entertaining and escapist, while other content delivered the ideological message. This way, Germans would keep consuming Nazi-controlled media, and the propaganda, when it came, would be more effective because it was mixed in with content they genuinely enjoyed. Goebbels exercised control over newspapers, newsreels, radio broadcasts, theater productions, art exhibitions, and music performances. Nothing could be published, broadcast, or performed without approval from his ministry. He didn't just control the message. He controlled the entire landscape of German cultural and intellectual life. In 1936, Goebbels orchestrated the Berlin Olympics, turning what should have been an international sporting event into a massive propaganda showcase for Nazi Germany. The regime temporarily toned down its anti-Semitic rhetoric and street signs to present a civilized face to the world, while using the games to demonstrate supposed Aryan European superiority. When Jesse Owens, an African-American athlete, won 4 gold medals, it threw a wrench into the Nazi racial narrative, but Goebbels' propaganda machine simply downplayed or ignored what didn't fit their ideology. As World War II progressed and Germany's military fortunes began to turn, Goebbels' role became even more critical. The German people needed to be kept in the fight, kept believing in ultimate victory even as the evidence of impending defeat mounted, and nowhere was this more apparent than in his infamous Total War speech delivered at the Berlin Sports Palace on February 18, 1943. This speech came just weeks after the catastrophic German defeat at Stalingrad, where an entire army had been destroyed. The German people were shaken, fearful, and beginning to doubt. Goebbels needed to transform that fear into fanatical determination. Following this speech, Goebbels was appointed Reich Plenipotentiary for Total War, giving him even more power to mobilize German society for continued warfare. He ordered the closure of non-essential businesses, the conscription of additional manpower, and the diversion of resources to military production. But perhaps what's most chilling about Joseph Goebbels as propaganda minister isn't just what he did, it's how well he understood human psychology, how effectively he could manipulate emotions and bypass rational thought. He adapted techniques from both Catholic religious rituals and Bolshevik methods for Nazi propaganda, creating a secular religion of National Socialism with Hitler as its deity and himself as its high priest. Now, there's a temptation to view Goebbels as simply a cynical liar, a man who manipulated others while remaining personally detached from the poison he was spreading. But the truth is, his anti-Semitism was genuine. He kept his diaries, and these diaries reveal something disturbing, which is, he believed much of what he was saying. His devotion to Hitler was real. His conviction that Germany was fighting for its survival against Jewish Bolshevik forces was sincere. This wasn't just a job for Goebbels, it was his religion, his purpose, his entire identity, and this absolute conviction, this fanatical devotion, would lead him to his final, most horrific act. As historians like Peter Longerich and Richard J. Evans have noted, Goebbels exemplifies how personal insecurities, when channeled into ideological extremism, can produce monstrous results. By early 1945, the war was clearly lost. Soviet forces were advancing from the east, and American and British forces from the west. German cities were being reduced to rubble by Allied bombing. The 1,000-year Reich that Hitler had promised was collapsing after just 12 years, and Joseph Goebbels, the man who had spent over a decade convincing Germans they were destined for greatness, now had to confront the reality of utter defeat. But here's the thing. Goebbels didn't waver. He didn't try to save himself. He didn't attempt to negotiate or escape. Instead, he moved his family into Hitler's bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, bringing with him Magda and all 6 of their children. This happened on April 22, 1945, as Soviet artillery was already pounding Berlin. When asked why he wouldn't try to escape, Goebbels told Vice Admiral Hans-Erich Voss something chilling. He said, "The captain must not leave his sinking ship." He had thought about it all and decided to stay there. This wasn't pragmatism or rational calculation. It was fanaticism taken to its logical, horrific conclusion, and it all began from a chaotic childhood, from humble beginnings to Hitler's right hand. What drives a man to murder his own children? What kind of twisted devotion leads someone to orchestrate not just their own death, but the systematic execution of 6 innocent souls who trusted them completely? Paul Joseph Goebbels was born on October 29, 1897 in Reit, Germany, an industrial town nestled near Düsseldorf in the heart of the Rhineland. His father, Fritz Goebbels, worked as a factory clerk, not a glamorous position, but steady work that kept the family afloat. His mother, Katharina Maria Odenhausen, came from Dutch and German heritage, and together they raised their children in a devoutly Roman Catholic household. The Goebbels family wasn't wealthy by any stretch, but they valued education, faith, and hard work. Joseph had 5 siblings: Conrad, Hans, Elizabeth, and 2 sisters, both named Maria. Tragically, one Maria died in infancy, and the name was given to another daughter born later. But young Joseph's childhood would be forever marked by a catastrophe that occurred when he was just 4 years old. He contracted osteomyelitis, though some sources suggest it may have been polio, a devastating illness that attacked his right leg and left it permanently deformed. The result was a clubfoot that caused him to walk with a pronounced limp for the rest of his life. He had to wear a metal brace and a special shoe, constant physical reminders of his condition. This deformity would later prevent him from serving in World War I, a rejection that fostered deep feelings of inadequacy and resentment. While other young German men marched off to war, proving their masculinity and patriotism on the battlefield, Joseph Goebbels was left behind, deemed unfit for service. For a young man in early 20th century Germany, where military service was seen as the ultimate expression of manhood, this rejection cut deep. And many historians believe this physical condition contributed to the bitterness and compensatory fanaticism that would define his later life. But here's where the story gets interesting. Despite his physical challenges, or perhaps because of them, Joseph threw himself into his studies with remarkable intensity. He excelled academically at his local gymnasium, showing a particular aptitude for literature, history, and theater. He devoured books. He wrote poetry. He dreamed of becoming a great writer, perhaps even a playwright who would rival the German masters. His family, deeply religious Catholics, actually hoped he would become a priest. And for a time, young Joseph even considered this path. But Joseph's intellectual ambitions took him in a different direction. He received a scholarship from the Albertus Magnus Society, a Catholic organization, which allowed him to pursue higher education despite his family's limited means. Joseph pursued higher education with remarkable determination. He studied at multiple universities, Bonn, Würzburg, Freiburg, and Munich, immersing himself in literature, history, and philosophy. The pinnacle of his academic achievement came in 1921, when he earned a PhD from Heidelberg University. His doctoral thesis focused on Wilhelm von Schütz, a 19th century romantic dramatist. Now here's an ironic twist that history loves to serve up. His thesis was supervised by Professor Max Freiherr von Waldberg, who was Jewish. That's right. The man who would become one of history's most notorious anti-Semites was educated by a Jewish professor. He had initially tried to study under Friedrich Gundolf, another Jewish academic, before being redirected to von Waldberg. The bitter irony is almost too much to bear. During these university years, something else was happening to Joseph Goebbels. He was being exposed to ideas and thinkers that would shape his worldview in profound ways. He dove into the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, particularly fascinated by concepts like the Übermensch, the Superman, and the Dionysian spirit. He read Goethe, Wagner, Oswald Spengler, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and Houston Stewart Chamberlain. These weren't casual readings. These were deep intellectual engagements that were forming the foundation of a dangerous ideology. He even explored socialist works by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, though he would later reject them. And through all of this, he was gradually distancing himself from the Catholicism of his youth, trading religious faith for a new kind of fanaticism that was brewing in post-World War I Germany. But here's the harsh reality that Joseph Goebbels faced after earning his doctorate. The world didn't care about his intellectual achievements. He struggled desperately to find his footing in the working world. He briefly worked as a bank clerk in Cologne, a job he absolutely hated. He also worked as a stock exchange caller, another soul-crushing job that was nowhere near the literary glory he had envisioned for himself, because that's what Joseph Goebbels really wanted. He wanted to be a writer, a novelist, a playwright who would be remembered through the ages. He wrote novels, plays, and poetry, pouring his heart and soul into his work. But rejection after rejection piled up. Publishers weren't interested. Theaters wouldn't stage his plays. His semi-autobiographical novel, Michael, wouldn't be published until 1929, and by then, he had found a different stage on which to perform, the political arena. By 1923, Goebbels began keeping extensive journals, a habit that would continue until his death in 1945. These diaries would later provide historians with an unfiltered window into the mind of one of history's most manipulative figures. They reveal his frustrations, his ambitions, his hatreds, and his obsessions in raw, uncensored detail. And then came the turning point. Germany in the early 1920s 1920s was a powder keg of resentment, economic turmoil, and political chaos. The Treaty of Versailles had humiliated the nation. Hyperinflation was destroying the economy. People were desperate for someone to blame, desperate for a strong leader who could restore Germany's pride. Enter Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. In 1924, Joseph Goebbels joined the Nazi Party, drawn in by Hitler's charisma during the beer hall putsch trial. Finally, this frustrated intellectual, this rejected writer, this man with a physical disability and a burning need to prove himself, he had found his calling, or perhaps more accurately, he had found someone to worship, because that's really what Joseph Goebbels' relationship with Adolf Hitler was. It was worship, pure and simple. Initially, Goebbels didn't align himself directly with Hitler's faction. He started out working with the northern, more socialist-leaning wing of the party under Gregor Strasser. He edited a publication called NS Brief and worked as a party speaker, honing the oratorical skills that would later make him one of the most effective propagandists in history. But there were ideological tensions within the party, clashes about the direction National Socialism should take. Then, in 1926, everything changed. Goebbels shifted his complete loyalty to Adolf Hitler, impressed by Mein Kampf, and particularly by Hitler's rejection of socialism as Jewish. This was the moment when Joseph Goebbels found his true purpose. He wasn't just joining a political movement, he was joining a crusade, and he had found his messiah in Adolf Hitler. The devotion that would eventually lead him to murder his own children was already taking root. Hitler recognized Goebbels' talents immediately. In 1926, he appointed Goebbels as Gauleiter of Berlin, essentially the regional party leader for the capital city. Now, the Nazi presence in Berlin at that time was pathetic. It was small, disorganized, and utterly ineffective. The communists dominated the working-class districts, and the Nazis were seen as a joke. But Goebbels transformed everything. He used aggressive tactics, street brawls with communists, provocative rallies, and ruthless organizing. In 1927, he founded Der Angriff, The Attack, a newspaper that was filled with vicious anti-Semitic and anti-communist rhetoric. He personally targeted figures like Bernhard Weiss, a Jewish police deputy, subjecting him to relentless propaganda attacks and cruel mockery. When Goebbels was elected to the Reichstag in 1928, he gained parliamentary immunity from libel suits, which meant he could spread his poison without legal consequences. The rejected writer, the failed novelist, had finally found an audience, and he was going to make them listen, whether they wanted to or not. His organizational skills were extraordinary. He orchestrated events like the 1926 Weimar Party Congress, turning Nazi rallies into theatrical spectacles designed to manipulate emotions and create a sense of power and inevitability. This wasn't just politics. This was performance art in service of evil. And when the Nazis finally seized power in 1933, Joseph Goebbels' wildest dreams came true. He became Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, one of the most powerful positions in the new regime. Goebbels had numerous romantic relationships throughout his life, often using them to compensate for the insecurities created by his disability. Early relationships included Anke Stahlhelm, which ended with Goebbels apparently considering suicide, and Elsa Janke, which was complicated by her half-Jewish heritage. Yes, before his virulent public anti-Semitism, Goebbels was romantically involved with a woman of Jewish descent. The hypocrisy runs deep. But the relationship that would seal his fate came in 1931. He married Magda Quandt, a divorced woman from a higher social class who brought along her son, Harold Quandt, from her previous marriage. Magda wasn't just any woman, she was a close confidant of Hitler himself, and their wedding was practically a Nazi state celebration. Together, Joseph and Magda had 6 children, and in a disturbing display of their devotion to Hitler, all 6 names began with H: Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. These children became propaganda tools themselves, portrayed as the ideal Aryan family, the perfect Nazi household that all good Germans should aspire to emulate. But behind the propaganda photos, the marriage was turbulent and dysfunctional. Joseph Goebbels was a serial adulterer, having affairs with numerous actresses, most notably with Czech actress Lida Barova in 1938, which nearly caused a divorce until Hitler personally intervened. Magda herself had affairs, including with Karl Hanke, but she tolerated much of Joseph's behavior for political reasons. She was too invested in the Nazi project, too close to Hitler to let her marriage collapse. Throughout all of this, Goebbels' clubfoot continued to cause him chronic pain and mobility issues, a constant physical reminder of the inadequacy he felt. He also dealt with various digestive problems. Sadly, the bitterness never went away. It just got channeled into ideology, into hatred, into a fanatical devotion to National Socialism and Adolf Hitler that would ultimately consume everything he claimed to love. Goebbels had the mind to be so much more, but he chose to become the voice of genocide, the architect of lies, the man who would convince millions to follow a path to destruction. But while Goebbels' life choices were questionable, his final act was even more unsettling. The final act: murder, suicide, and the death of a regime. By late April 1945, the situation in Berlin was apocalyptic. Soviet forces had completely encircled the city. Artillery shells rained down constantly. The air was filled with smoke, dust, and the sound of explosions. Above ground, brutal street-by-street fighting raged as Soviet troops pushed deeper into the city. And beneath the Reich Chancellery, in the concrete labyrinth of the Führer bunker, the leadership of Nazi Germany huddled like rats in a sinking ship. The bunker housed Hitler, his wife Eva Braun, Josef and Magda Goebbels, their 6 children, and various other high-ranking Nazis and their staff. The conditions were claustrophobic. The air was stale, and the constant vibration of nearby explosions was a reminder that the end was very close. On April 29th, Hitler dictated his political testament, his final statement to history. In this document, he appointed Joseph Goebbels as Reich Chancellor, the successor to lead what remained of Nazi Germany. For Goebbels, this must have been the ultimate validation. Hitler, his hero, his Führer, the man he had worshipped for nearly 20 years, had chosen him as his successor. But both men knew this was a symbolic gesture. There was no Reich left to govern. The appointment of Goebbels as Chancellor was like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Goebbels wrote in Hitler's testament that he would refuse to leave Berlin for reasons of humanity and personal loyalty, and that his wife and children would remain to end their lives alongside the Führer. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide, shooting himself in the head while simultaneously biting into a cyanide capsule. His new wife, Eva Braun, took cyanide. Their bodies were carried outside, doused with gasoline, and burned in a shell crater in the Chancellery Garden. Joseph Goebbels now technically became the Reich Chancellor, though his tenure would last less than 24 hours. He made one official act in this role. He sent General Hans Krebs to negotiate a ceasefire with Soviet General Vasily Chuikov under a white flag. The request was rejected. The Soviets demanded unconditional surrender, nothing less. This rejection sealed Goebbels' resolve. There would be no survival, no escape, no future in a world without National Socialism. This takes us to the most horrific part of this story. Joseph and Magda Goebbels had 6 children. Helga, born in 1932 and now 12 years old, Hildegard, 11, Helmut, 9, Holdine, 8, Hedwig, 7, and Heidrun, just 4 years old. All 6 children were in that bunker with their parents, completely dependent on adults who had already decided they should die. Magda also had an older son from her first marriage, Harald Quandt, who survived the war precisely because he was not in the bunker. He was serving in the Luftwaffe and was a prisoner of war at the time. Harald would later have to live with the knowledge that his half-siblings had been murdered by his own mother. According to testimony from survivors, Magda reportedly insisted on killing the children, stating they should not live without National Socialism. Let that sink in. Not they should not live under Soviet occupation, or they should not live through the horrors of defeat. No, they should not live without National Socialism. The ideology was more important than their lives. The ideology was everything. The murders took place on the evening of May 1st, 1945, possibly late on April 30th. The exact sequence of events has been pieced together from various testimonies, and while some details remain disputed, the basic facts are clear and horrible. The children were first sedated with morphine injections, administered by SS dentist Helmut Kunz. Kunz testified after the war about his role, and his testimony is one of our primary sources for what happened. The children trusted the adults around them. They had no idea what was about to happen. Once the children were unconscious from the morphine, cyanide ampules were crushed in their mouths. Kunz testified that while he provided the morphine, it was Magda Goebbels and Hitler's personal doctor, SS Obersturmbannführer Ludwig Stumpfegger, who handled the cyanide. A 2009 investigation by Spiegel magazine into trial testimonies from 1948 raised questions about who exactly administered the cyanide, with Kunz initially claiming responsibility but later implicating Stumpfegger. But regardless of whose hand physically crushed those capsules, the moral responsibility lies with Joseph and Magda Goebbels, who ordered the murders of their own children. Rokus Misch, a bunker telephone operator who survived the war, recalled seeing the children alive and playful earlier that day. Eyewitness Katha Hubner, a nurse, also described Magda's emotional state during this period, noting her determination despite apparent grief. This wasn't a mother who was indifferent to her children's fate. By all accounts, Magda loved them. But her devotion to Nazi ideology was stronger than her maternal instinct. She had convinced herself that death was preferable to life in a world where National Socialism had been defeated. When Soviet forces later found the bodies, they were dressed in night clothes. There were no signs of struggle. The children had died in their sleep, never knowing that their parents had chosen ideology over their lives. Soviet autopsies confirmed cyanide as the cause of death and noted bruises possibly from convulsions, but the sedation meant the children were unconscious when it happened. Around 8:30 p.m. on May 1st, after their children were dead, Joseph and Magda Goebbels left the bunker and went to the Chancellery Garden. What were they thinking in those final moments? Relief that it was almost over, regret for what they'd done, continued conviction that they were dying for a noble cause? We'll never know for certain. Accounts vary on the exact method of their deaths. Joseph Goebbels likely shot himself in the head, possibly after ingesting cyanide, while Magda took cyanide. Goebbels' SS adjutant, Günther Schwegermann, testified that he heard shots, saw the bodies, and, per prior orders, had a soldier fire additional shots into Goebbels' body to ensure death. He then doused the corpses with gasoline and attempted to burn them in a shell crater, but the cremation was incomplete due to limited fuel and ongoing artillery fire. So far, there have been contradictory reports on the incident. Rokus Misch claimed Goebbels shot himself in his bunker room, with Magda dying in the Vorbunker. Vice Admiral Hans-Erich Voss, in his final conversation with Goebbels, heard him lament Hitler's absence but affirm his decision to die, citing his family and his clubfoot as reasons against attempting escape. Even at the end, that physical disability, that source of lifelong insecurity, played a role in his thinking. Soviet forces discovered the partially burned bodies on May 2, 1945. SMERSH, Soviet counterintelligence, identified Goebbels through dental records and his distinctive foot deformity. His clubfoot, the physical condition that had shaped so much of his psychology and driven so much of his bitterness, became the means of identifying his corpse. The remains of the Goebbels family, along with those of General Krebs, Hitler, Eva Braun, and Hitler's dogs, were exhumed and reburied multiple times to prevent the creation of a Nazi shrine. The Soviets didn't want any place where neo-Nazis could gather to venerate their fallen leaders. Finally, in 1970, a KGB team cremated what remained and scattered the ashes into the Biederitz River. Joseph Goebbels, who had spent his life creating monuments to Nazi ideology through propaganda and spectacle, would have no monument himself. His physical remains were scattered to the wind and water, lost forever. Eyewitnesses like Hitler's secretary Traudl Junge and valet Heinz Linge corroborated the sequence of events in post-war accounts, emphasizing the bunker's atmosphere of despair in those final days. Even Goebbels' own diaries, which end abruptly in April 1945, reflect his growing fatalism amid Germany's military setbacks. So what are we to make of the story of Joseph Goebbels? How do we process the life and death of a man who was undeniably brilliant, who possessed remarkable talents for communication and organization, but who used those gifts in the service of genocide and ended by murdering his own children? Historians like Anthony Beaver and Ian Kershaw have highlighted the Goebbels family deaths as a chilling example of loyalty to a doomed regime. This wasn't a military necessity. This wasn't protecting the children from torture or abuse at the hands of Soviet soldiers, though that was the justification Magda gave. This was ideological fanaticism taken to its most extreme, horrifying conclusion. The tragedy of Joseph Goebbels isn't that he died. It's not even primarily that he murdered his wife and himself. The tragedy is what he did to those 6 children, and beyond that, what he did to millions through his propaganda. He helped create the conditions actions that led to the Holocaust. He helped convince ordinary Germans to participate in or turn a blind eye to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews. He also helped sustain a war that killed tens of millions of people. Overall, it's safe to say that Goebbels' propaganda machine was a key component in one of history's greatest crimes, and his story will be forever remembered. Do you think Goebbels' final act was loyalty or a proof of how blind devotion can destroy everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. For more videos like this, click on this next card on your screen.